It's not quite the crowd we had like the critic panel on his post never wrote. That's not real crowd.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the panel here. If you're here, and this is a special panel for the Southwestern Political Science Association. It's a special panel for the Southwestern Social Science Association. We're here to pay tribute and memorialize our friend and our colleague Joe Stewart, who passed away unfortunately, and so we wanted to schedule a panel where both some participants who all knew Joe, worked with Joe, and audience members could have a chance to say something about their connections to Joe. When I was looking for a name, one of the privileges of being program chair is you get to give names to panels. And so for this one, it might have even come from a conversation I had with Keith not too long after Joe's passing, where we were emailing or texting back and forth, and we said, look, Joe knew everyone, and someone should diagram the connections between Joe and all of us in the room and so many people around the country and around the world that Joe knew. That's true. Many of us met Joe or spent a lot of time with Joe in bars also. So it was my idea to perhaps, I thought, well, we could have a bar in here, but then I thought that doesn't make sense because he would have wanted to go to the bar. That's it. So I scheduled it at the end of the day. Many of us have some meetings still later, but my hope is that we will leave here in enough time that those of us, anyone in the audience also would like to join us. We will adjourn here and we'll convene again downstairs in the bar. We probably won't fit around the carousel, but we can go over that other section. And we can have not only a tribute to Joe with our panel, but we can have a toast to Joe and Joe's memory downstairs. So we're actually going to start. We do have an order here, and I'm going to introduce the first speaker, and then I'm going to let the other speakers introduce. They know what order they're supposed to go in, but I'm going to let them introduce themselves to keep the panel moving. But it's my great honor to introduce what I know as one of Joe's oldest friends, longest friend.
Sometime you cleared that up.
Also oldest.
No, we got Neubauer here.
I just read Days by 73. Okay, so formerly of and longtime professor at Wichita State University, now of Sheffield and Stewart Productions. I like it.
They wanted a title, an institution, and I don't have one.
I could have retired in the program, but that's so. Professor Jim Sheffield. Yep.
Thank you, Steve. I'm glad you cleared one thing up because the first thing I had to do was to correct the 6 degrees business because Joe at most had only 4. And I'm not sure about the 4th. I don't know whether he got a master's at either Georgia or Houston or not, but anyway, I'll try to be brief. This may take a while. Joe was a man of many dimensions, as all of you who knew him readily will agree, I think. I've tried here to grab a couple of those that either struck me at the time or meant the most for some reason, and most of those are probably too foggy for explanation here. But he was curious. He was intense on occasion, fun-loving, sensitive to the circumstances of other people. He had a great vocabulary. That wasn't always apparent, but he loved words. One of the interesting things to watch for as reading things that Joe wrote was to see what new word he had sneaked into the text of what he was writing. Sometimes appropriate, sometimes a little bit less so. He had a great ability to assess and understand people and what they were doing and why they were doing it. He didn't always try to explain that to anyone else, but he saw it, and it was something that he was extremely good at. On the lighter side, Joe was an entrepreneur. I don't know whether any of you knew that. Joe and I and a few others once owned a bank in Nashville for a while, a few days. And when Joe and a graduate student of mine got together, this was during the days of outlaw country. Those of you who can remember that far back. And Joe and Alan created a firm called Totadilla. Their mission was to make sure that people who were infatuated by the newly recognized pet, the armadillo, was immediately available as an adopted pet for anyone who wanted one. He got a great kick out of that. He didn't sell many Totadillas, but they had fun with the business. He supported university efforts to encourage responsible consumption of alcohol. This was also back in the days when the drinking age was being lowered rather dramatically in many places. And Joe supported that by holding alcohol awareness sessions in a nearby watering hole. They were usually well attended. This is also the age at which Chablis had suddenly come on the scene and was the new white wine of choice of most people. And as most people, Joe had his own favorite white wine. It was called 5 o'clock. And that sparked something in Joe, and he was later able to contribute lyrics, music, and a song titled to Jimmy Buffett, who made it into a fairly recognizable hit. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. You probably didn't know that, but it's true. Joe collected baseball cards, traded them with friends. And when the Braves moved to Atlanta in 1965, Joe thought the world had turned for the better. And he had a lot of fun with baseball in those days. Since then, he was involved in an email thread with some of the rest of us who celebrated the major leaguers who were still in the news, and more frequently in the news because they were passing away. And as they did, this email thread, we would figuratively turn over the playing card of the player who most recently passed and celebrate his accomplishments that we remembered. Joe's love of sports was also extended to basketball. He coached a high school basketball, girls' high school basketball team for a year or two when he was teaching high school. And during the years that he was in West Virginia and Texas, he refereed a great number of high school basketball games for the schools there. Joe's interest in activism of individuals and groups who had been marginalized by society, I'm getting a little more serious here for a moment, were central to the courses that he taught, the research that he did, and a lot of the professional side interests that he took up. Most of you know some of those. A couple of the more obvious ones that connect several of us in this group were the 2 decades plus that he spent with the Advanced Placement Program in various and sundry capacities. Joe was also involved in the Center for Civic Education's We the People program very extensively. And it was something that he thoroughly enjoyed and profited from personally, as well as contributed to in a significant fashion. At Clemson, Joe was a principal figure in causing the university community to celebrate each year the accomplishments, dreams, and aspirations of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This past winter, the university awarded him posthumously the Dr. MLK Jr. Award for his work in that regard and trying to actualize the dreams of Dr. King and successfully pursue social justice for those who were oppressed. Tragically, I think it's at least my understanding that he was on his way to a planning session for the 2024 MLK celebration when he suffered his fatal traffic accident. Joe was adept at understanding the people that he had around him. It's a principal reason for his professional success. As a teacher and as an advisor, I have seen him and heard of his counseling students, working with students. And I know of a couple of success stories that he had where he had graduate students who had somewhat sketchy professional or personal aims after graduate school. And he was able to turn them in a completely different direction. And as a result of those two individuals that I know personally of, have become very successful college faculty members in a couple of different places. That was something that Joe was extraordinarily good at. As Steve alluded to earlier, Joe had a long association with this group. He gave his first professional paper at a meeting of the Southwest Association in the mid-70s. He contributed almost every year to the program of the association for a number of years, eventually served as vice president, program chair, then later as president of the Southwestern Political Science Association, and even later than that as president of the parent organization. And he was quite proud and happy to have contributed in that regard. It was at one of those meetings, by the way, some of you will perhaps remember this, that Joe and I observed one of our distinguished colleagues attempt to throw another of our distinguished colleagues off the 18th floor indoor balcony of a prominent Houston hotel. I'm happy to report it was an unsuccessful attempt. It was certainly manfully attempted. Joe was a friend of mine. I don't know how else to say it. We shared a lot. I have the memories, but I frankly give everything to have him in person instead. I hope each one of you has a friend that means as much to you as Joe to me, and hopefully me to him. It was a good tour. And in last, Jim Littlesberger over here, Joe's close personal friend, wrote a beautiful essay of Joe. I've been shared in various venues, and it's a wonderful portrait of the man I knew. It's a much better job of characterizing Joe than I've done here. I want to thank him for doing that, sharing it with us, because it's really good. Thank you, Jim.
So I have to go after that. I'm not going to try to repeat what I have written. It's on the SSA website if any of you all have not read it. It was done relatively quickly after Joe died. And it really expresses kind of what I would say. But I wanted to make a few comments. One of the things about Joe is, as scattered as Joe was, he kept us focused. Joe could be bouncing off the walls, and frequently was, with ideas, with concepts, with what we ought to do, with what we ought not to do, and with amusing stories about all of us, often very cutting amusing stories about all of us, usually directly to our face. But he kept us focused on what was important, because we all knew that that was a diversion for Joe to the central mission of what he was about. He was always about making our profession better. He was a teacher by choice and a teacher by nature. And that was just Joe. He did serious analysis, had an incredible depth of knowledge. The thing that would amaze people once you got through Joe's accent, and that was a bit of a slog. Joe had an accent that no Georgian would claim, no Alabaman would claim. We have not quite figured out the origins of Joe's accent. We would just call it Joe. And but once you got through that, people all over the country would say, "Oh my God, this guy is unbelievably smart." And I would say that was one of the basic characteristics of Joe. And you were treated to that every time you were with him. Joe was about connection. The first time he met somebody, he became their friend. The next time he met them, you were his family. Simple, straightforward. That was true for all of us that knew him. If you don't believe me, ask Rhonda over here. He had a wicked intellect. I want to pick up on something Joe said. Or Jim said a minute ago. Joe, one time he was doing a poster session with Rick Waterman. And he had a right triangle diagram on it. And I went up to him, and being the smart ass I am, I said, Joe, everyone knows that triangle diagrams in political science have to be lateral triangles, not right triangles. And Joe said, oh no, in this case, it had to be a right triangle. And I said, why? Boy, did I set him up. He says, because I've been waiting my entire career to use the word hypotenuse in a paper. This is Joe. This is Joe, okay? His sense of humor was absolutely legendary. I mean, anyone who has not read Rotisserie Political Science needs to go do it again. It is even better now than it was when it was written. It's just fabulous. And although Ken Meyer claims co-authorship, he realizes that it was mostly Joe while they were drinking one night in a hotel room that put that together. And again, I'm not going to go through more things than that. But Joe was a man of unlimited capacity to love, unlimited capacity to care about others, unlimited capacity to make everyone around him better than they would be without him. Now, I'm about to hand this to Keith Gaddy, but I have to tell a story. I was standing outside of a hotel bar at the Palmer House many years ago. I'm not sure whether it was an American Political Science Association meeting or a Midwestern, but it was one of the two. And Joe was talking to his friend, colleague, and mentor, Chuck Bullock. And we were having a friendly conversation. I had not met Keith Gaddy. And Joe is standing there and he says, oh my God, Chuck, here comes Keith. And Chuck turned around, looked at me, looked at Joe, looked at Keith and said, oh my God, another one of my train wrecks. Which of course meant that Joe was his first train wreck. And with that, I'll pass it to Keith.
God bless poor Jim. I'm changing offices at TC. I'll be right next door to him. Everybody's doomed. No, first of all, it's a pleasure to see and follow Jim Sheffield. Was glad to take a couple of waterfront already. And Jim, with Ms. Jim's good to see you. Yeah. I want my shirt back.
I had it first.
There's a thing we ought to touch on. It's been kind of touched on. This is where I'm going to go. Is that literally every person sitting up here with me, I met with Joe. Every single one of these people, and so many where I met with Joe. And I was talking with Chuck Bullock. I was back in Georgia a few weeks ago, and he said, Keith, you need to remember that Joe was what, 15 when he went to college, something like that.
He finished at 19, that's all I can tell you.
They got a master's degree in like a year at FSU. If he just kept going straight through, he would have been 22 with a doctorate, but he had to go change 6-on-6 women's high school basketball in Georgia for a while. But he, incredibly smart, incredibly fun. But the main thing is incredibly caring. I think this is the important thing. Because Joe built a network, and as Jim pointed out, first he mentioned you were friend, that you were family. And that matters, that matters tremendously. And I can say plainly in my life, because I took Joe's network, and I burrowed into it and built one out and extended beyond it. I only met one person ever who didn't like Joe Stewart. But the fact is, none of us like that person either. And in fact, all I say is this individual had a doctorate from a place where I spent a sizable number of years on faculty. And upon going there, Joe reminded me, said, Keith, you remember, it's permissible for a department to petition the regents to revoke the degree of an alumnus. And you need to keep that in your pocket just in case. But that piece, that network, the fact that Joe would have you come up, take you in hand, introduce you to other people, that network piece is huge. It's very important in the profession. And a thing that I think Joe knew that my own mentor, our mentor, Chuck, always talked about is you never know when you're going to mean something to someone in life, whether it's in the classroom or anywhere else. So you better be on your best behavior, whoever you're going to be, because you never know when you're going to matter to that person. They'll let you know yourself. And sometimes that's love, sometimes that's tough love, but it matters. And what I loved about Joe is he would introduce me to people. We enjoy the conversation, we dig deep, we're pretty serious. But he also cared enough to make his friends my friends. And you have to pass that on, you have to carry that forward, right? Because that's the tensile strength of the profession, which is what we are. We are a social profession, and we're losing that. Losing that. Because we have to find the connectors and the miners out there. And if I can ever get through all the data and the 95 essay responses I got from people, when I asked for stories about Joe, there's a story of mentorship there to be told that matters. Matters. Because that's, I can speak like this, I'm not a public person. Joe embodied what the right-handed Christian fellowship reside, which is in the greeting of the stranger. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Sam.
Thanks. Like all of you, a lot of my experience with Joe is either at conferences, but also at the AP. And there was one time when, as usual, going to the AP readings, flights are horrible. So invariably somebody is late. And I had a flight that was delayed a day, so I missed the first day of training. And I call up AP and they said, well, you'll need to get permission. So here's a number. So I call the AP office on site. And, woman answers, I explain who I am, missed a flight, can I come? She goes, well, I'll need to check with the chief leader. And I hear, Joe, can you, Sam, come in? And it was just real rough. Yes, bring him in. Because he was busy with other things. And his job was to get the reading done. And so he made sure, he got there. But he was always very gracious and very friendly, very helpful, as all of the people have said. One thing, it was beyond just academics. He came to Mobile to do a workshop at one of the local high schools. And so I invited him over for dinner. And people have commented about his accent. When he grew up, a good portion of his young life is in a portion of Alabama called Sand Mountain. Very rural, just rural farmers, and not well known even within the state. My wife, parents all grew up in Sand Mountain, so she spent a lot of time as a child going back up there. And so they were just exchanging stories back and forth. But he had this wonderful way of, you didn't have to be an academic, a political scientist, that he could find a connection and then talk with you, find out your experience, get to know you as well as getting to know himself. So I think that's one of my favorite things about Joe, is that friendship was academically, it was really important to me, but just on a personal level and beyond. And so I want to say very much. I think that was a rare quality.
I'm Lydia Andrade. I think I'm, as usual, the token chick at the table, which was usually the case with Joe and these guys. First, I want to say how much I appreciate the opportunity to be here and speak on behalf of Joe's friends. It's quite an honor. I'm not quite sure I deserve it, but thank you. When I was thinking about this panel, I realized I have visited New Orleans many times with Joe. And so I sincerely hope that he's here with us in spirit today, but just in case, I brought some insurance. Because, you know, he needs to hear what we truly think.
Here he is.
Pretty much everybody in this room knew Joe well, but for those of you who didn't, please do not believe any of the kind, wonderful comments these people may share with you about his scholarship or his teaching, because that's not why we're here. We're here because Joe was a ringleader. He was the Pied Piper. Now, sometimes he would lead you into very positive, professionally valuable associations, and it would be life-changing. Sometimes he would lead you, well, there were crimes involved, but we don't want to. So I started thinking about all the places that I knew Joe had led a bunch of us. For me, it included decades of spending my summer reading thousands and thousands of American government AP exams. For several people in this room, Nancy, he led us to Manly, Nebraska for their annual county school fundraisers, otherwise known as the Testicle Festival.
Yeah, that was good time.
The good times, we all got shirts, but we couldn't wear them in public. Don't ask. Woodard was there too, but Nancy was there because I remember she was talking about how big the boys were in Nebraska. Joe, ours never left the drawer, but that's another story. Joe also led this association. Someplace that no other SSSA president ever managed to lead us. Joe's plenary session had the only US presidential candidate who has ever spoken at this association. Okay, it was Kiki Friedman, but the turnout was really good for the plenary, and we hadn't even started serving alcohol at the plenary yet. It was really good. Joe even managed to lead on college campuses where he didn't teach. Joe was the inaugural Constitution Day speaker on my campus. This is what happens when you leave it to me. So I invited several other people in this room have also served in this quite distinguished position as being the Constitution Day speaker. But Joe was the first. And when Joe came to give his presentation, he not only managed to get a really good jab on my brand new been there 1 month dean that went over really well with the audience, but not so well with that dean. But he also had the opportunity to attend a football game in my university's inaugural Division I season. Now, Joe was used to attending football games, you know, Georgia, Clemson, South Carolina, supposedly strong programs. But it was only at the University of the Incarnate Word did he get a game that went into 2 overtime periods and a series of 2-point conversions till we won the game. Now, prior to going to the game, I took Joe to a tailgate. Okay, this was a tailgate conducted by all the non-football coaches at the university. And as I took him up, I was the faculty athletic rep, so they knew why I was there. They're like, who is this dude? And I kept saying, well, Joe is our Constitution Day speaker. Well, it took like 5 minutes. No one's talking to me. They're all talking to Joe as he's showing off his cornhole skills and drinking forte. And it took about maybe 20 minutes and he gained a new nickname. Every coach on my campus started calling him Constitution Man. Which, given Joe's love of AP and We the People programs, he wore this as a badge of honor. So we go to the game. Towards the end of the game, the university president makes his rounds. And I said, oh, well, you know, this is Dr. Joe Stewart, blah, blah. He's like, oh, Constitution Man. At which point he was invited to return to any and all UIW football games because we decided he was the only reason we went. But that's what Joe did everywhere. He made friends wherever he went. In the AP program today, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of high school teachers who only know Joe as that great AP leader that we loved and the guy who taught us how to teach American government. Here at the SSSA, Joe led us in a very positive initiative of learning to really reach across to our disciplines and become a truly interdisciplinary association. He also holds the distinction of being the only SSSA president to have a panel named after him, not this one. It was an Authors Meet the Critics panel, in which he never wrote the book being evaluated. It's very well attended, and Keith Gadden did an exemplary presentation. But on a serious note, more importantly, Joe showed us how to love what we do for a living and not take it quite as seriously as university administrators might like us to.
Going to open the floor here for those of you who would like to say something about Joe. And I'm gonna model at least part of that behavior. By saying that I would never have imagined in 1992, as a graduate student at the University of New Orleans, I just wrote a paper on police, had to do with race and policing in New Orleans. It was actually, my graduate mentors here, they knew about it, but the paper was actually for a Dick Engstrom class. And those of you, many people in the room know Dick Engstrom, and Dick said, you should submit this paper to the Southwestern because they give an award called the Ted Robinson Award. I don't know if that award is still, is it presented? Okay. And I received that award in 1992. And so I drove to the meeting. I think the meeting was in Austin that year. And I got to the meeting and Dick Engstrom said, well, came along, said, I want to introduce you to someone. And that someone was Joe Stewart, who had taught at the University of New Orleans. Well, I was there because I wasn't born yet. Because Dave hired Joe in what year? 1974?
77.
77.
78, 77, 78.
So long ago, I can't remember.
Well, we kicked him out of Wichita and New Orleans, so that's why.
I said I would model this by being brief too, but obviously I'm not doing a very good job at that. So I met Joe in 1992. And it's been a career-long and lifelong friendship that Jennifer and I've had with Joe. He was, when we got jobs at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, he was one of the first people that we called and said, hey, we'd like to have a speaker for our students, but we don't have any money. And Joe said, it doesn't matter. If you'll pay my gasoline, I'll drive there and I'll give a talk. We miss him. And he's a wonderful friend, wonderful colleague. And I'll stop there and just ask anyone that would like to speak to stand up and tell us how you know Joe and who you are. Will?
I met Joe like so many other people in Great B, and that's my advisor, the guy on the left, Steve Schill. My first introduction to Joe Stewart was with Steve, and we got to the Midwest Political Science Association conference my first year of grad school, and walked in and we checked in and everything. We went to a hotel bar, and Joe was there at the campfire and some others. And Steve was anxious to introduce me around, so we sat around, had drinks for a while, and David Dubauer and others, and Jim, you guys know Steve. Steve was tight, so put it mildly. But anyway, Steve had to go to a panel, and we sat there for a couple hours and drank. And a couple of other grad students at the end of it, Joe said, well, what room is Steve in? 1162, and we tapped out, and he said, boys, with a friendly advice, he said, never tell anybody what room you're in. Steve Shaw, room 1172, and stuck him with the bill. Joe Stewart. Anybody knows Steve? Steve probably until the day he died was trying to get that money back.
They'll fight about it in heaven.
Yeah, Dave Newgar, I was chair of poli-sci, young department, young chair. And I just remember, and then when we first came in, there's a lot of energy, and we're trying to build a collegial department. And Joe was a key part of that. He, the graduate students are here, ex-graduate students, he helped them all the way along. But his knowledge of baseball, we're sitting there at UNLV. In the first inning, there's number 2 hitter, has a single, stretches it to second base, he's out. 2 innings later, the guy gets a walk, tries to steal, he's out. 3rd inning, and the 5th inning, by that point, he hits a double, is out of the third. Toward the end of the game, close game, Joe says, walk, we need the out. And the family, the last time I saw Joe, was at the APSA in BC. And we talked basketball, because my son was a college basketball coach, and in Clemson, he went up to their coach, and said, and they knew one another, and that's the family you were talking about. I mean, it was instant, spontaneous, that was Joe. So, I was amazed at all the time he spent in social life, but you know, all his incredible output as a scholar. He was a model in so many ways. Joe, he was you.
I don't remember when I met Joe. It was either at AP grading or it could have been at this conference. But I always saw Joe in the bar. I can tell you the one thing that Joe was never successful at, and that was finding me a husband, which he promised to do. Husbandless. Promise. It is. Say I will try. So all his networking, of all the people he knew, apparently there's no one else.
We knew who he knew, you're okay.
Okay. Excellent. That's right.
Carlos Bertha, Texas A&M Corpus Christi. You know, when I first got into, the business here, and going to conferences in the mid-90s, I was really lost. I didn't know what to do with going to conferences and whatnot. And I don't know if it was at Midwest APSA or here, but, we were so reception, Joe was there, and I had read his work, I knew about him, and then I found out he was a QH PhD like me. And so somebody introduced us, I just went up to start talking, and I was just so impressed how gracious and welcoming he was. So here's this guy, we didn't cross paths there, and just the way he helped do that, and just, his way of helping me connect to the people. A lot of folks in this room, and if it's a Joe, it's that important part of, reaching out, see somebody, needs to introduce, talk to them, bring them in. You never know the impact you're going to have. And I didn't quite understand the hotel bar scientists until I got to the road, and then I understood, oh, I get it. That's what they all do. One time, somebody to Houston, we were in Houston, we went to our dinner, and I think Sheffield, you might have been there with Joe, and I think you were too, Jim. You guys were there, so we all went to dinner. You guys were at the hotel bar. We were going like 2 hours. We came back, and they were still there, just doing their thing. And I said, okay, I think I got this figured out. So it's a good old job. Go Cougs.
I'll do one real quick. Follow up after there from Carlos there. My first time, I'm not Jeff Justice, by the way, South Texas College, and I've got fewer gray hairs and wrinkles, I think everybody's learned, so I didn't get the privilege of knowing him for quite as long, and that's a loss, I think, overall. My first, I'd say, exposure to him was Rotisserie Political Science, one of my all-time favorite articles. Give that one another read. There's a lot of wisdom in the humor behind that one. And in fact, that was part of what I think it was Denver in 15. Carlos comes up to me with a $5 bill and says, I want you to go up to the bar and get a can of beer and put in a bag. And the result of that was the creation of the Joe Stewart Award for Excellence in Levity, which of course he was the first recipient of it. We pull out the can of beer in the bag, and what does Joe do? He pops it open and drinks it right in front of all of us there. And several distinguished recipients of that award are sitting up here this time of year. But that was, you know, that was actually where I met him, was at a bar, and he never said a whole lot, but when he did speak, you listened to him. And I appreciated the short amount of time that I did have with him.
So many bars. Um, he shared his scholarship with us. He, as a young scholar, gave you feedback. He shared his time, with all of us, so. Last chance. I think,
Put in one plug. Clemson has established.
oh, yeah.
Oh, yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Scholarship. And Jeff Fine sent out a Facebook post about it. I think it's Facebook.
Well, it's on, I drink in hotel bars with Joe Stewart, and there is it shows, there's a link.
There's a
So,
link there, and Jeff suggested that you should contribute the amount of money you spent on beer or drinks at a bar with Joe.
If you can
Or-
still afford that.
Or if we all contributed just price of one.
At least
drink,
one drink.
the scholarship would be.
Yeah.
They would keep all of Joe's friends.
So
Yeah,
tell.
thank you, Sam, for.
I should mention that some of us were able to join the family at tribute to Joe. Back in Clemson. Jim was there, Sam was there, Jim was there. I was there listening.
Yeah.
And Chuck Bullock was there.
Chuck
was there.
So.
And Joe had two boyhood friends.
Oh, yeah.
Who drove to come, you know, it was just classic Joe. I mean, he was apparently the same guy at age 10, as he was when we knew him. And in fact, I want to be serious about Jim's bank investments, because one of them started a bank,
Yep, John was the guy behind the bank.
and Joe got a whole bunch of his friends to invest in the bank. And they all asked him the same thing. They said, "What do you know about this investment?" Joe said, "Nothing at all. But I know John. Your money's good with him." And it was.
Yeah.
And that's the way Joe was. It was all about quality of character. And, you know, Martin Luther King said it best. Joe was all about content of character. That was what he was about from day one to the very end.
That's a perfect way to end it. With that, we'll adjourn to the hotel bar. Or anybody who'd like to join us.
Or we'd like to take a picture so we can.
We will take a picture.
On the Facebook page.